I want to introduce Doug Taron. He's the Curator of Biology and Vice President of Research and Conservation at Chicago Academy of Sciences Peggy Notebaert Nature Museum. He's worked at the museum since 1999 and manages the 2,700 square foot Judy Istock Butterfly Haven, overseeing also the management of the Chicago Academy of Sciences collections and the insect conservation biology research. Under Doug's direction, restoration activities have involved nearly a dozen imperiled butterfly species, including the regal fritillary and the swamp metalmark. So I so appreciate him coming. He did have a family emergency, and we had to cancel the in-person event, but I really appreciate your presenting to us all. So Doug, if you can go ahead and thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Leslie, and thank you everybody for coming this evening. It's great to see such a nice online audience here. I am going to share my screen here, and we can get going. So the title of my talk is, I don't see as many butterflies as I used to. Is this statement really true? And what prompted the title is I have been working with butterflies one way or another since I got my first butterfly net from the Easter Bunny when I was 6 years old. And I have heard this statement all my life. And for a long time, I thought this was just part of the foibles of human memory, that, you know, if you're not actively looking at butterflies, you remember that day as a kid that you were outside and there were just butterflies everywhere. And you tend not to remember the days you weren't noticing them. So one of the things I'm going to talk about this evening is the fact that we now have more and more quantitative data that can actually help us to address this question in a little bit more of a rigorous manner. Oops. Okay.
You know, I had to click on it to, yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Sorry, I've got a new laptop. I don't know where anything is here. Okay, so red admirals are an example of a butterfly that is very familiar to most people. We tend to see them all the time. They're common in urban areas. Are these butterflies declining? And this is an aside, I will add, the red admirals are kind of having a moment, not only in the Chicago area, but over much of the Northeast US. I'm in Massachusetts at the moment, and they're doing the same thing out here. There are quite a lot of them that you're seeing. But there are other butterflies, and you can contrast butterflies like the tiger swallowtail on the right, which is another butterfly that's a very abundant species that is adapted to urban areas, or is the decline confined to some of these species like the regal fritillary on the left that require more specialized habitats? Now, a couple of things about some of the data that we're going to be talking about tonight. The statistical analysis that we're going to be looking at was done in 2018. And we have not done this kind of statistical analysis again since then. We will probably revisit it in the next year or two. And as we will see, we are going to look at butterflies kind of grouped together rather than as individual species. Between the 2018 analysis and now, another paper has come out that has used some of the Illinois data to look more specifically at some of the rare species. And to no surprise, to me at least, they are also experiencing some declines. So people have been speaking for a number of years now about something called the windshield effect. And this is a very informal way of talking about this issue. The fact that some years ago, when you would say go for a day trip or a road trip, at the end of your trip, you'd have to scrape all of the dead bugs off of your windshield. And in an informal sense, and not in any sort of formal scientific sense at all, people have been noticing that there's less and less of that happens, that you can drive around and don't see the kind of bug splat on your windshield that you did years ago. So the question we're going to be addressing is this sort of observation real, or is it an artifact of people's memory? Now, I will also hasten to add here that the analysis that we're going to be doing is not actually going to be looking at bugs on windshields. So just a bit of a forewarning on that. But this has become a popular topic lately. It's become the subject of not inconsiderable conversation. In 2018, there was a big article in the New York Times called "The Insect Apocalypse is Here," and talking about a variety of kinds of declines in insect populations that have been reported in different places. And it turns out with the different taxa. So this table is actually really just a partial listing of some of the studies that have been done. And as you can see, these are in many, many different places, and they are with many different groups of insects. And all of these have shown significant declines in insect populations over the last 10 to 20 years, and the timeframes that are addressed by these studies vary. But in 2018, there was a study that came out of Puerto Rico that just showed a general decline of arthropods there, and that was using a variety of sampling techniques. In 2013, there was a study that came out of Germany, and this is one of those studies where they fog insecticide into the trees and measure what falls out. And in this case, they were just weighing the insects and seeing per unit of effort of fogging certain area of trees, what do you get for insect biomass? And they had detected a significant decline there. A study in Great Britain in 2012 showed a decline in ground beetles in Great Britain. A year earlier, a study out of this country, showed a decline in bumblebees. And in 2006, there was a study out of Great Britain that showed a significant decline in moths. So we're seeing that this is, a range of different taxonomic groups, a range of places, and a range of sampling techniques that all seem to be pointing in the same direction. And when you're doing these types of studies, what you really want to have is a big data set. More data always seems to be more powerful. You want it to track abundance, preferably of multiple species, and preferably over a long period of time. And here in Illinois, there are a bunch of programs that fit the bill on this sort of thing. But here in Illinois, we've got one program, the Illinois Butterfly Monitoring Network, that very, very definitely fits this bill. Now, I want to say a few words about this because our data set that we are going to look at was collected by the Illinois Butterfly Monitoring. Now, this is a citizen science program. And in fact, anybody can participate in this program. We offer trainings in how to collect the data and how to identify butterflies and pair people up with places on public lands across Illinois where they can monitor butterflies. This program has been in place for a long time. It was founded in 1987, and it was initially founded by the Nature Conservancy. And back in the 1980s, the Nature Conservancy was sponsoring a lot of ecological restoration activities going on in Illinois, in particular in the greater Chicago metropolitan area, Chicago and the collar counties. And these activities predominantly focus on things that you do with plants. So they involve things like removing invasive plant species, collecting and dispersing seed of good native species that we want to establish on these sites, and introducing things like prescribed burning. And what the Nature Conservancy was asking at that time was, okay, all of these activities are predominantly focused on plants and seem to be very, very effective in improving the plant communities. But what is happening to the animal communities? Butterflies were chosen as a study group for a number of reasons. First of all, as insects, they are part of the most species-rich taxonomic group that you will find on a prairie. Insects comprise over 50% of the species that you will find on most natural areas, including prairies. They're a tractable group, they're diurnal, there are good field guides all over the place, and there was an existing technique that had been developed in England in the 1970s for quantitatively measuring insect populations. And in particular, this program was developed to track change over time and to be amenable by having the data collected by people who did not necessarily have a lot of formal scientific training. The program is currently supported by the Chicago Academy of Sciences Peggy Notebaert Nature Museum. And as a citizen science program, it is a volunteer-based program. And we get a lot of data. So the way the program works, everybody gets assigned a certain location. And this location is a forest preserve, a nature preserve, state park, any sort of public land, city parks. And on this piece of land, we map out a survey route. And a minimum of 6 times each summer, what we ask people to do is to walk this survey route at a constant pace. And while they are walking, they envision themselves in the middle of a bubble, 20 feet in radius, 20 feet on either side of them, in front of them, and above them. And the bubble moves with them as they walk. And any butterflies that they see inside of the bubble are identified and counted. And the survey is timed. They record the time that they start walking their transect and the time that they stop. And so one walking of the survey route is one survey submission. And this particular graph maps survey participation through the period of analysis that we're going to be talking about today. This particular one is mapping the number of survey routes that are done. So like I monitor at Bluff Spring Fen, that would be one route, even though I got 6 or 8 times a summer. If you do the same type of graph with the total number of surveys that are done each summer, since 2019, in Illinois, we have received over 1,000 surveys every summer, each of which potentially has dozens of butterflies reported on it, dozens of species, scores of butterflies at the height of summer for some of these sites. So this is a large quantity of data, and that's the main thing I want to get across with this particular graph, is that we have now a lot of information that we can work with for this analysis. So the survey route is designed to cover most of the major habitat types and management units on the particular site that the route is on. And really big sites, places like Illinois Beach State Park, for example, are going to have potentially multiple survey routes established on them. I think we have 3 at Illinois Beach State Park. At one point, we had something like 9 at Medewin. So, big sites get a lot of routes on them. So we go out at least 6 times a season, and this going out multiple times is important because through weather and variables like how cold and what was the spring, how early was the spring, things are going to shift around a lot. So this allows you to, let's say there's one species you're monitoring that normally flies in late June. This year, we've had a very early spring. It might be flying in mid or even early June this year. And if you're only going out in late June, you're going to miss it this year. But if you're going out 6 times across the summer, you're going to be able to um, avoid this kind of problem of shifts in phenology that happen year to year. It also is, I'm not going to talk directly about this tonight, but it is allowing us to detect certain effects that are almost certainly due to climate change. So here's a map of the Illinois butterfly monitoring survey sites in the Chicago area. And the main take-home lesson from this that I want people to get is that these are scattered all over the region. They're actually scattered all over the state. Do I have the state map up here? I do not. But if you look at the state map, what you're going to see is a big hunk of them are over here in the Chicago metropolitan area. And that's simply because this is where we have the population base that can support a lot of volunteers. But there's also having people in a region really committed to monitoring helps, because in the extreme southern tip of the state of Illinois, we've got a bunch of very committed monitors, mostly who are working through the volunteer program at the Crab Orchard National Wildlife Refuge. And if you looked at the state dot map, you'd see a whole bunch of them up in the Chicago area, a few scattered down the state, and then another slightly smaller clustering of them in the extreme southern part of the state. So this really expands from Wisconsin down to Cairo and from Lake Michigan to the Mississippi River. So again, for the period of time that our analysis is going to be for in this talk, we're looking at the period of time between 2000 and 2018. And we are confining our analysis to observations in the 6-county region around Chicago, Lake, McHenry, Cook, Kane, DuPage, and Wilf. So in the metro area, from 2000 to 2018, we have over 9,000 surveys. There were 11,433 hours of survey time. That is 1.3 person years. And one of the things that really points up is the value of citizen or community science. By having lots of people potentially out there collecting data, you can collect way more than if you're just in, say, one academic professor's laboratory, which is going to be a handful of people, most of whom are there for a maximum of 4 or 5 years if they're doing a PhD. So this gets a lot of people out there counting, and one result of that is there's a lot of data. We have, over that period of time, recorded 94 species of butterflies, which is about what you would expect for the Chicago metropolitan area. There are a few very rare vagrants that are probably missed by this, but for most analyses, they're not really terribly significant from an ecological or conservation value. They're just things that occasionally stray outside of their normal range. Over that time, we counted 188,554 butterflies. We are now coming up, if you look at the whole lifetime of the Illinois Butterfly Monitoring Network from 1987 to 2023, we are coming up on 900,000 butterflies counted. And so we're sort of peeking over the horizon, and sometime in the next couple of years, we are going to count our millionth butterfly. And we are now up to about, this year we will hit 20,000 surveys. So large quantity of data here. So how do you use this data? How do you take all of these numbers that we got and come up with something meaningful? And there are lots of ways that you can do it. And there are a bunch of ways that have been done in various academic laboratories across the country. The Illinois butterfly monitoring data have been used generally with other butterfly survey data from various places to produce about a dozen peer-reviewed papers at this point. So this data set is being used increasingly. So the way we're going to look at it this evening, the way we are going to talk about how to generate some information out of the data, is we are going to create an annual butterfly index. And the way that this index works for each year, I'm going to take for the 6-county region and total up all of the butterflies that everybody out in this region has counted that year. So we're not going to worry about identifying the butterflies to species in this analysis. It's just that anything that got counted, we will total up. And then we're going to divide that by the total number of hours that people have been out collecting in the field that year. And so the unit of measurement for this annual index is going to be butterflies observed per hour. And then what we're going to do is we generate one of those for each year from 2000 to 2018. Then what we're going to do is get the average. What was the average that people saw? We just total all of those numbers up and divide by 18. And then the final thing that we're going to see a number of graphs here in a moment that we do is we're going to see by what amount each year's index is either above or below that average value. So let's say the average is 6, and one year we saw 4, and the other year we saw 11. The first year is going to be below that average line, and the second year is going to be above it. This is what it looks like. So this is from my site, Bluff Spring Fen. And as you can see, between in this case, 1990 and 2009, those values jump up and down, and some years they're above average and some years below average. And then from 2010 to 2018, we enter this period where very consistently all of the data are below the average that have been observed since 1990. Here is what you get if you look at Kane County as a whole, and it's a very similar type of appearance. The data jumps up and down, and then as you get to about 2010, suddenly everything goes below average and stays there consistently. Chicago metro area had a really, really bad year in 1993. But then kind of jumped up and down. But the same thing happened as you get to about 2010, with the exception of 2013, it is now very consistently below the average for that time frame. So this sort of suggests that something has happened in the last 12 or 13 years that has resulted in consistently low numbers of butterflies. One of the things that this study, one limitation of it is that although it will tell you that this is happening, this approach tells you nothing about why it's happening. But it's still important because you can say, well, we're seeing this pattern, and now other more detailed studies can be proposed and executed to try to figure out why this is happening. So taking a look at what the trend over time is, we've done some linear regression analysis. And what this does is this generates an equation for a line. And the slope of the line, if it is a 0, a flat slope, then there's no trend. If it's a positive slope, the data are suggest that the numbers are increasing over time. Negative slope suggests the numbers are decreasing over time. The null hypothesis for this analysis is that the slope does not differ significantly from 0. The significance, or p-value, is a value that ranges between 0 and 1, and it measures the degree of mathematical confidence with which the described relationship was not produced randomly. In other words, how confident we are we that this positive or negative slope is not just a result of random variation in the data. And a low p-value means greater significance. Generally, a lot of statistical analysis uses 0.05 or lower as the cutoff for statistical significance. And what this means is at 0.05, mathematically, you are at that point 95% confident that your data are not simply randomly correlated, that there is a non-random correlation to the data. The other value that comes out of this equation is the correlation coefficient, or R squared, and that ranges between 0 and 1. And what R squared tells you is what proportion of the variance in the data are explained by the model that they're using. And in this case, a higher R squared, one that's closer to 1, means that your model is explaining a greater proportion of your data's variance. If R squared is 1, that means that this model is explaining 100% of the variance of the data. And that line that you've mapped, all of the points would not be scattered around the line. They'd all be directly on the line. If you're doing a highly controlled laboratory experiment where your experimental model is happening in a test tube, you can get R squareds greater than 0.9. In general, for an environmental study, an R squared of 0.35 or greater means you're doing pretty well. You're explaining an important part of the variance in your data through your model. So let's see what we look like here. And this is a map of, or a graph of, the change of abundance from 2000 to 2018. And the slope here is negative 1.07 butterflies per hour per year. So that means that every year, this model suggests that when you go out and count, you're seeing 1 butterfly per hour fewer than you would have the previous year. And over a long period of time, that starts adding up to a rather important decrease in butterflies. The p-value here is very, very low. It's less than 0.001. That means that there is over a 99.9% chance that these data are not simply randomly correlated. And your R squared is a very, very healthy 0.60. So that means that time is an important variable in this model, and that the decrease really is happening over time. We can ask a few more questions about this. One of the questions that we can ask is, do all or most species contribute? And one way to think about that is, if say one species had its thumb on the scale and you took it out of your model, would it still show a statistically significant decline over time? In the Illinois Butterfly Monitoring Network, only one butterfly species is abundant enough to tip the scale as a whole, and that's the cabbage white. In fact, cabbage whites account for more than 1 out of 3 butterflies counted in the Chicago metropolitan area in the butterfly monitoring surveys. So one of the things that we did was to run the model 2 ways. We ran the model, as I just showed you, for all butterflies. And then we pulled the cabbage white data out and ran the model again for all butterflies except for the cabbage white. And if the cabbage white were sort of single-handedly or tarsidely responsible for this decline, you would expect to see the decline go away, or at least be very, very drastically reduced in the remaining butterflies. So here's what you see in the change in abundance, first of all, of the cabbage white variation. We also did the model for just cabbage whites. And as you can see here, there is still a p-value of less than 0.5. Our squared value has gone way down, but there's still explanatory value here. And cabbage whites themselves are going down, but not with such an enormous significance that you would anticipate that they would be the cause of the overall decline that you're seeing. When you look at the change in abundance of all other species, there's very little change in the data. The p-value is still highly significant at greater than the 99% confidence interval, and the r-squared is down just a little at 0.42, and that's to be expected because you've taken a big chunk of the data out there, out of your model, because cabbage whites, being one of 3 butterflies observed, are a big chunk of the data. So this suggests that many species are contributing to this decline. It is not just the cabbage white. So I'd like to finish up here by talking a little bit about the Illinois Odonate Survey. This is also a citizen science program. It uses the exact same protocol as the Illinois Butterfly Monitoring Network, except people are counting dragonflies and damselflies instead of butterflies. There's not as much data in this program. First of all, it hasn't been in existence for as long. It was founded only in 2003. And the annual participation, while growing, has not had the time to develop the really huge participation base that the Illinois Butterfly Monitoring Network does. So although the data set is smaller for the Odonate survey than it is for the Butterfly Monitoring Survey, there's still enough of it to be usable and to do an analysis. And when you do the same sort of analysis and just look at general Odonate abundance over time, you see the same thing. So here the p-value is 0.01, so it's significant at the 99% confidence interval, and the r-squared value is 0.36. The significance is not quite as great, and the r-squared is not quite as explanatory, but that's to be expected with a much smaller data set. Generally, one of the values of using a larger data set is that these type of trends become easier and easier to detect, and you tend to do it more robustly the bigger your data set is. So what that means is an overall decline rate of minus 1.07 butterflies per hour per year, which is, I'd rather it were not that way, but that is what the data show. And this means a 31% decline in detected butterflies from 4,408 to 30.54 butterflies per hour between 2000 and 2018. If anything, dragonflies have been worse, with a decline from 10.27 to 4.45 dragonflies per hour from 2003 to 2018, which is a 57% decline. So there are other studies. What I just showed you is very, very effective in visually demonstrating what has been going on. It's not really involved enough to be publishable. There are other studies that are using this data set that are coming to similar conclusions, but they're using much more involved statistics to reach very similar conclusions. But this is all adding to a growing body of evidence regarding overall insect decline in the environment. So I'd like to thank a whole bunch of people, because a whole bunch of people helped out with this. You don't get this kind of a data set, this magnitude of a data set, without a lot of people helping out. Most importantly, the Illinois Butterfly Monitoring Network and Illinois Odonate Survey volunteers, the people who are actually going out into the field repeatedly over the summer in the hot sun, getting sunburnt and mosquito bitten and ticks, and yet they keep going out year after year and producing this really great data set that people are starting to do some amazing things with. Allison Sarsadote-Villat and Elena Goldsberry were instrumental in helping out with the Odonate data here. Leslie Reese of Georgetown University is the person who rides herd on Pollard Base. Pollard Base is the national database where butterfly and Odonate survey data are being deposited. Pomona is the butterfly and monitoring, Pomona is the butterflies and moths of North America. There we go. And they have been very helpful with our data set as well. And we can't ignore the funders for this, U.S. Forest Service, the Vanderpool Conservation Foundation, and Patagonia have all been very, very generous funders of this work. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I would be happy to take a few questions.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your the detail on this. I mentioned beforehand I'll watch the chat, but I hope people will put their questions in the chat. But I wondered, so what, I know we can't determine why this is really happening, and in some ways it's kind of hopeful to me this is only really that the decline really started in 2010 because it's so short term. I don't know. That's probably stupid, right? I mean. But I also just wonder, can we, what impact do we make by doing little gardens and changing the way we lawn and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, I got so there are really two parts to that, and I will take them in order. First, the decline since 2010. It's possible that there has been a smaller decline going on over a longer time frame. It's just that if you look at the data before 2010, there's not enough of it to really detect a signal out of the noise at that point. And the data only go back, in the case of the butterfly network, to 1987. So, all of these people who have been saying, I don't see as many butterflies as I used to ever since I was a little boy in the early 1960s, we have no way from this data set of addressing whether they were actually right or not. That's one part of it. Now, in terms of what you are doing, for what you can do and what people have been doing to help with this, I think what you do in your backyard can be very helpful. I think it is important to keep in mind what backyard stuff will and won't do. When we started the Butterfly Monitoring Network, our focus was very much on these rare species that were really dependent on high quality natural areas like remnant prairies and remnant wetlands and that sort of thing. And of course, what you do in your backyard is not going to have much of an effect on them. But what we've been seeing through this data set is the decline has been seen over a wide variety of taxa, including the common stuff. And therefore, providing additional resources to this declining group of insects, I think the worst thing that you can say about doing that is that it doesn't hurt. I suspect it's doing quite a bit more than just not hurting to help insect populations. It doesn't take a lot to see the difference between a traditional park where it's just mowed lawn under mature trees is not going to have nearly as many resources as even a modest backyard garden that has lots of nectar resources. And if you're going to be gardening for butterflies, I think it's a great thing to do. I think in particular, if you're just starting out, I would keep it really simple. And I wouldn't worry about host plants for the caterpillars. I would, at least for just starting out, worry about nectar resources for the adult butterflies, because that's a much more tractable thing to work with. Now, the good thing is, for example, one of the really primo nectar sources for adult butterflies happens to be common milkweed or swamp milkweed, both of which are great host plants for monarch butterflies. So, some of this, what you do is going to be serving multiple purposes.
Great. Looking at the chat, one person asked whether you can say the name of the platform on which the data is collected, and do volunteers log the data directly into an app or some other way? I think they're just wanting to participate.
Yeah, okay, so the app is called PollardBase, and it's named after Ernie Pollard is the person who developed this method of walking route where you're counting all of the butterflies within a set distance of yourself. And these have come to be called Pollard walks or Pollard surveys or Pollard transects. And so we call the database that they're stored in PollardBase. You can only put data in, get an account to put data into PollardBase through the Illinois Butterfly Monitoring Network. So you have to go through one of our trainings and be trained in how to collect the data. And one of the things that we train you how to do is how to submit your data to Pollard Base.
Why don't I later on, like next week or something, get together, some information on this so that we can share out to all the people who attend. I'll do that later on, if that's okay.
Yes. Oh, and one other thing about Pollard Base, the way it works. So when you have an account and you submit data for your survey, it doesn't go directly into the database. One of the program admin people has to look at the data for your survey and approve it, and then it goes into the database.
Right. Okay. Well, you sort of answered this already, but hypothesis based on the factors contributing to the declines. You already really talked about that, but maybe you could say a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I think the one thing I can say with confidence is it's almost certainly no one single thing. This is probably one of these death by 1,000 paper cuts situation where all kinds of things are happening. So you've got loss of habitat. We know that when you convert a prairie to a parking lot, you're going to lose stuff, and we've lost a lot of stuff that way. I think the situation with pesticides is complicated, and I think it's almost certainly contributing to the decline. But I also think it's very easy to just sort of, with a very broad brush, demonize pesticides. And it's probably a much more nuanced picture than that. And in fact, I believe there's a paper in the peer-reviewed process at the moment that is going to take a look at that. And that I am not a co-author on that paper, but that paper does use Illinois Butterfly Monitoring Network data. And the lead author is sharing drafts with me, but I think they've done a couple drafts since I've last seen it. But that should be pretty interesting. And then climate change, it's going to be really complicated what it continues to do to butterflies. There are probably going to be winners and losers. We're already seeing some of the losers. And that's not something that I talked about in the analysis we were talking about this evening, but there are a number of species that we were on the southern edge of their range. So they're species that are predominantly more, they had the center of their distribution further north of here. And a number of these have either dropped out of the Illinois fauna or become much, much less common. But you go up into Wisconsin and you still see them with some abundance. But there are a few things that seem to be coming north from further south. One other pattern that we're seeing is that the ones that are retreating north that we're losing tend to be more specialized species that have more specific habitat requirements, and the ones that are coming in from further south tend to be more generalist species that are very tolerant of disturbance.
Okay. Somebody also asked how the influx of cicadas, do those impact butterfly populations at all?
I am not aware of any way in which they impact butterfly populations. I'm looking forward to getting back to Illinois because I'm hearing that they're here. They're coming out already, and I can't wait to see them.
Okay. You also mentioned that even with the decline, insect populations fluctuate from year to year. What are some of the species that are having a good year? You were just speaking about this in terms of climate change, but maybe a little bit more in terms of, I also wondered that, I mean, because insects have such a large a lot of eggs, is there a possibility for rebound of some of the species that are in trouble?
And there is possibility of rebound. I will go out on a limb and make one prediction that after a couple of really bad years, I have a feeling monarchs are going to do better this coming year. And I have a feeling that next year, what we see in Mexico is going to be a somewhat less alarming number than we've seen this year and last year. And part of the reason I'm saying that comes from Illinois Butterfly Monitoring Network data. We've got to we collect data on everything, but that includes, therefore, a very big monarch data set. And one of the things that the data set has been used to show is that the numbers that you see here in Illinois in a given summer tend to be really good predictors of what you're going to see in Mexico the following winter. But the reverse is not true. What you see in Mexico in the winter is a very poor predictor of what you're going to see in Illinois the following summer. And I think what that means is that the annual population level is set much more by reproductive success up here than it is by survival success on their wintering grounds. So what butterfly species are off to really good starts this year? And there are a lot of the species that are associated with earlier in the year. So we're seeing a very good year for red adams. We're seeing a very good year for American painted ladies. Downstate, some of the swallowtails are having really good years. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that up here. And even cabbage whites and common sulfurs seem to be off to a very good start. My comments about monarchs a moment ago, we started seeing at least a few early straggler monarchs coming back up here from the south very early this year. They normally don't get here until about Memorial Day. But I saw the first one in my yard in late April, and there have been sporadic reports from around the Chicago area of people seeing monarchs already, which is really early for them. And one of the things that that means is that's going to give them more time to build their population up back in the reproductive part of their range.
But all of this is within the confines of the decline of the species, right? It doesn't mean when you say they're having a good year, that doesn't mean that they're, you know, adjusting. Yeah. What does that mean, a good year? Yeah.
Well, one of the things that people sometimes struggle with on this, you see this in the media a lot, and it can drive me crazy sometimes, is bouncing up and down. That is typical of insect populations, and it's because they have to do at least one complete generation each year. So, and some of them do as many as three, or at least in this part of the country, as many as like 3 or 4 generations in a given year. So they're going up and down a lot, but over time, the ups are not getting quite as high and the downs are not getting quite as low. But one of the things that that means is you've got to collect data over a much longer period of time to see a signal out of that all of that noise that shows up in the data. So with the monarchs in particular, what you will often see in the newspaper is the monarchs are down 27% this year, and it's like that doesn't actually mean anything, because they can go up 156%. You know, it's the long-term trends that are important. And for a lot of these things, simple year-over-year trends don't mean very much in terms of the big picture.
Right, right. And we did have someone saying that they found monarch eggs, which must be in Evanston, on common milkweed that just emerged. She said, milkweed that's 3 to 6 inches tall, so tiny. Well,
yeah, that's still plenty for the caterpillar, because the milkweed is going very rapidly at this time of year, and the newly emerged caterpillars are tiny and don't eat very much, so the milkweed can kind of keep up with their demands.
So you said don't really worry about larval hosts. You know, I get worried about larval hosts because I get worried about everyone using you know, nativars, cultivars, and exotic plants. And I realize they're generalists for nectars, but I'm just worried about the overall.
Okay, it turns out that things like nativars and cultivars are actually worse for the adults than they are for larvae. If you've got a nativar that happens to be a host plant, the larvae tend to be okay with it. But let's say you've got one of those really wild purple coneflowers with, you know, the frilly hat on top of the cone and all of that. They often don't produce very much nectar at all. And so I actually, with sort of horticultural oddities like that, I actually worry about more about the adults than I do the larvae.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, great. Well, good. Well, are there more questions? People are already thanking you, but yeah, this is incredibly helpful. I really appreciate your time and your discussion of all this. Just wait for 1 second to see if anyone else has more comments, but thank you so much. We really appreciate your help, and we probably can let you get on with your evening here. Oh, Ryan, you have a question?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll say it just because it's faster than
Yeah,
typing since we're
right.
almost done. But I just wondered, you mentioned that pesticides may have maybe over-villainized, that they have an effect, but perhaps not as much as we think. What about simple lawn chemicals in our yard? Does that have an effect? And should we be telling lawn companies to not use those for
I
someone
think
who doesn't want to have a whole full-fledged butterfly garden? Can they still have a good impact?
well, I think uh teasing out the specific effect of the chemicals can be tricky with that, because one of the real problems with lawns is simply that they don't offer much in the way of resources. You know, you've got in your ideal lawn that would be the kind of appearance that people who do a lot of the very chemical intensive lawn management go for, is a monoculture of Kentucky bluegrass, and that just doesn't support very much. You know, there's no nectar resources. There's maybe one or two larvae that will use um, Kentucky bluegrass as a host, but other than that, it's not offering much for the butterflies. So how much is it the monoculture and how much is it the chemicals? I think my concern is that by overemphasizing the chemicals, we can ignore other problems like those engendered by a monoculture of Kentucky bluegrass.
Sure. So, so my neighbor's lawn chemicals aren't really affecting much in terms of the butterflies in my lawn. It's not,
It depends on the
or in
chemicals.
my, okay,
If they're using something that's a broadleaf herbicide to kill off everything other than the lawn grass, that's probably not actually having much of an effect on butterflies. But if they're using something to kill the beetle grubs in the soil or something like that, which is going to be an insecticide, then there's more potential for uh, collateral effects into adjoining areas. So it really, that's one of the other reasons that it can be difficult to just say, well, pesticides are bad for butterflies. Uh, some of them are, some of them may have other bad effects, but being bad for butterflies may not be one of them.
mhm.
Let me ask one last question. One person asked if there were areas or regions that showed up as better for butterflies or dragonflies. Probably that might relate to improved habitat, I assume. But
Well, some of this is what level of granularity are you looking at the data with? In general, there's more in the extreme southern part of the state. And I think that just goes along with the further south you go, the more species there tend to be, or the further towards the equator, I should say you go, there tends to be more species, there tends to be more abundance. And, you know, we do know that winter tends to be hard on butterflies. If we have a hard winter, and you're looking at a species that has several generations per year, each generation in the summer seems to be a little bit bigger than the one previous to it. That's sort of an illustration of how winter can be hard on butterflies. So if you go someplace with milder winters, it doesn't tend to be as hard on the butterflies. Leslie, you're muted.
sorry about that. Somebody also asked about electromagnetic fields. In put in a study, have you looked at that at all?
I have not.
Yeah, yeah, okay, okay. Well, there are some studies mentioned, and I'm happy to share that out later on too. Great. Well, this is incredibly helpful. We'll close up. We really appreciate your help and your time and plugging away and coming to talk to us, even though there's a lot going on for you. So thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.
I really appreciate it. Okay, I'll close up. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.